Good afternoon. This is the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee. We are here on the 23rd of October, and we are taking up our next conversation on the Fairland Briggs Cheney Master Plan review. Have Natalie Fani Gonzalez here, as well as the District Council Member Krista Mink, and Council Member Jawando is joining us virtually. So we are going to start on the transportation piece of this, and we have our new transportation analyst. We're very pleased you'll be joining us, and this is your first foray into staff reports and into master plan. So welcome and thank you for your analysis. We also have the planning department and Department of Transportation here as well, but unless there are any comments from council members, we can dig right in and start with our transportation staff report.
Thank you, and I was waiting last week with bated breath, so excited to get to the transportation part today. I wanted to just start this off by saying, I've had a lot of conversations with DOT and with planning about many of these pieces. I'm going to try and cut to the ones where there's not agreement between, or there might be some differences in views of how certain language should look between these three parties. If you are interested in hearing about any others, happy to walk through them. So starting off with the transportation goals, and we'll get shortly to the plan-wide recommendations. The goals section, I think, really anchors this the transportation side of this plan in the US 29 transit corridor. The BRT kind of builds out from around that. All the activity centers, all the other street connections, and the bicycle pedestrian facilities are really all linked to that, so that's worth keeping in mind. The new street connections is an interesting and sort of from what I understand, not super precedented consideration or recommendation in this plan. It would look to essentially bridge the gap between cul-de-sacs and roads that are not very well connected to get us towards a more street grid-like system. I think all parties have sort of seen that as a real positive in order to accomplish some of the goals of Vision Zero and Thrive 2050. I will note, and we'll go more over the fiscal impact statement next week, but these new street connections, the idea would be to have them privately funded. So that is another plus there. I wanted to highlight, and you'll see a lot of comments on this, are the recommendations. Recommendation number 4, to remove a few interchanges from the master plan on highways and transitways. These interchanges are all with US 29 and would be at Greencastle Road, Fairland Road, Musgrove Road, and Tech Road. Currently, planning recommended the removal of these interchanges due to studies they have done of regional transportation analysis. DOT has recommended further study in their comments to see the more localized effects. I think whether a given study is going to be effective might be worth planning to hone in on, but I wanted to sort of put that front and center as one of the things that DOT was the most concerned about in their comments. And then the other, that's really it. That for the street network recommendations section, that's the big sticking point. Do you want to have a conversation about that, or do you want to move on to some other recommendations in here and then go through all of them at once?
We can go through one at a time. Are there any comments or questions from colleagues? Then we can, and then we'll turn to planning and to Department of Transportation.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear from the Department of Transportation on their opinion on this. That's it.
Great.
Certainly. Good You can hear me, right? Good afternoon, Marisela Cordova, Montgomery County Department of Transportation, Acting Deputy Director of Transportation Policy. So we really didn't want to seem like we are against this recommendation. We actually agree that the interchanges might not be the best recommendation there, but we wanted to propose having a study, having the opportunity to evaluate each of them in a little more detail. So we were proposing a comprehensive infrastructure and performance analysis of the intersections along US 29 between Paint Branch and Burnsville to identify which measures are helpful to serve the area travel's needs and not just get rid of the interchanges without any further evaluation. So this analysis would include any necessary improvements to non-auto infrastructure and services and include assessment for all modes of east-west connections such as along major roads like Randolph Road, Briggs Cheney Road, Greencastle Road, and the Intercounty Connector, MD 200, both westward further into Montgomery County as well as eastward into Prince George's County. And the analysis would also evaluate operational and safety needs at the intersections along the US 29 corridor, including whether new ideas for intersection modifications, access controls, grade separations, or interchanges are necessary or beneficial to the overall performance of the corridor for all modes. This work would be particularly important if dedicated transit infrastructure is to be constructed within the US 29 right-of-way. So we think that the interchanges used to be strategies that were helpful at the time, but we really would like the opportunity to review this further and make sure we make the right recommendations and actions.
So appreciate that, but what would be the negative to remove? Like if you agree, in principle at least, that the interchanges as they currently are do not reflect what we would want for safety and for quality of life and for environmental policy reasons and otherwise, what would be the benefit in keeping interchanges for the purpose of studying them to confirm that we don't want them and then to decide what we actually do want as opposed to eliminating them and then starting from a new place if we need to of what we actually would want in these areas?
Yeah, Andrew Balsey, Montgomery County DOT. The concern, of course, with the transportation analysis with the plan says that the auto metrics, they worsen about 6%, transit metrics improve about 14%. We don't really have an understanding right now of how much is the right balance. Like, should transit improve 20%, 25%, and where? Are just the neighborhoods in this plan area, if they improve, but we also have Viva White Oak, pretty much by the old reckoning, beneficiary of interchanges. That's a whole city coming in. Do they also improve, or do we need more infrastructure to serve them? We want to make sure we understand how much non-auto stuff we need and where to make sure everyone can still be mobile, safe, and right now just the high-level metrics aren't quite enough to get us there. So we think the end is the same place. It's just the details of how to get there.
But when will we figure that out? I mean, this is not in a random area. This is in an area that is served by the first dedicated BRT line that we've been talking about for a decade at least, that we've been moving towards for several years. At what point are we going to get out of the planning and discussion and study phase and moving towards here's what we want, let's move towards actually making it happen? I mean, you can understand the concern here is we do what you're recommending and we're exactly where we have been for longer than anybody would like, and it's just not clear to me how your recommendation would get us to where we want to go in any reasonable period of time.
We do have the two existing projects, US 29 BRT, Randolph Road BRT, one more or less implemented and still has other parts still coming up. Randolph BRT planned, but on paper already. This analysis would see what else in addition to that would be necessary, things that aren't planned today. So we have where we are today, but is there more we could be doing?
Is there anything, if you eliminate the interchanges, that would prevent you from doing that?
We could do it. It's just obviously if it's in the master plan, it's a little bit more solidified.
If your concern is you want to have time to figure out all the other amazing transportation amenities that reduce non-auto driver mode share, I'm all for, like, where do I sign up for that? I'm all for it. I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding we should keep in interchanges that we don't want, that are auto-centric, that are unsafe, and that are outdated, because we want to further study modern improvements to provide more infrastructure. I'm just not sure I'm following the thought process. Can I turn to planning and get your sense of this, and just speak to your recommendation and why you stand by it, or if you have changed your mind based on what you've heard from Department of Transportation?
Yeah, I'll give it a try. Clark Larson, for the record, one of the co-leaders of the Fairland Master Plan. I'll give a high-level response, and maybe I can turn it over to our transportation planner to fill in the gaps. But I think, Council Member, you're on the right track about the purpose for the master plan calling for these recommendations, really setting the expectation from a policy standpoint of the kind of infrastructure that we think is deserving in this area. Council staff is correct that we perform very high-level regional forecasting at a policy level, policy area level, which is slightly larger than the plan area, incorporating the regional travel model of trips on buses, cars, non-auto driver modes as well from across the region. But we wanted to see what would be the effect of the forecasted growth if the land use built out to maximum with the anticipated new trips in cars, in buses, and so on. What would be the impact of all of these recommendations in the master plan versus if it were not adopted? That's really what our regional forecast looked at. The results were that, as was referred to previously, there's a slight decrease in jobs accessibility by automobile as a result of one of the metrics that comes out of this. That could be for a number of reasons. It might be slight more congestion in the area. It might be just that there's less jobs being planned in this plan area than are allowed in zoning today. So there's a little bit difference of the trajectory of the land use development and the types of people that are moving around. But as well, an increase in transit accessibility and an increase in bike and pedestrian accessibility. So that, I don't know that it necessarily can be comparable as far as offsetting each other, but that gave us the level of comfort to see that by removing the planned interchanges along US 29 that the 1997 master plan planned for, it would not completely, degrade the transportation system as far as vehicles are concerned. And so that's what allowed us to move forward with thinking about, let's take away the planned intersections. Let's not even say that they are supported in the master plan as interchanges on this road. We have a number of other safety improvements at intersections, bike and pedestrian improvements, as we'll get into soon. But that really is the main thrust of the recommendation for the street network, in addition to other small-scale connections, but really looking at these interchanges as changing the trajectory of what the transportation network looks like, how it operates, how it addresses how people move around, really looking at more of a localized, we think, improved experience for people driving around. So that's maybe my first take. I don't know if our transportation planner in planning has anything to add to that from a more data-driven standpoint, but that would be my reaction.
Any brief thoughts from a transportation planning perspective?
Sure. For the record, Chris Van Alstyne with the Planning Department's Up-County Transportation Team. I think, Clark, thank you so much for that explanation. I don't have a huge amount to add other than we do believe that this meets all the requirements of the adequacy standards set by the Growth and Infrastructure Policy. To your point, it's well taken. Sometimes studies, that could be useful. We believe that's outside the scope of this master plan. We believe it does meet the requirements. I do want to lean, as Clark was alluding to, and what the chair was alluding to, is that this is a transit forward plan. We are double downing on the existing BRT, Flash BRT. Our vision of US 29 is going to be more of a transit focused corridor, a people focused corridor. And quite frankly, the interchanges would be a hindrance to moving that direction. So if we know that it works according to our standard metrics, and we're seeing progress, especially on the transit accessibility front, we're confident that this will work. and it will meet the vision that we set forward. In the
Appreciate that. Just for Department of Transportation, if we move forward with the recommendation from planning and from council staff, is there anything stopping you from doing a study to look at additional transit options and other ways to move forward?
No, and I'll clarify that, like, we're not intending to send the plan back or disagree. It's just to add a note that opens that door to make sure, like, we want that study to look at what other transit options beyond what we already have planned might be necessary.
Appreciate that. My view, and I'll yield to colleagues here, but I think most people want us to get out of the studying business and into the doing business. So I'd rather, if we know where we want to go here, let's just say what we want and do it. And if there are, additional things that, can help move us in the right direction, then let's do that too. So I, tend to agree with planning and council staff. But
I agree.
okay, and that's.
I agree as well.
All right, so all committee members, anything? We're getting a nod from the district council member as well. So appreciate that. Why don't we continue?
Great. Moving on to the bicycle and pedestrian network recommendations. I wanted to bring up 2 points here. One highlighted by DOT, which was the fact that this plan, as it is proposed right now, does not include a pedestrian or bicyclist connection across US 29 to connect the two halves of what is proposed to be the Fairland Town Center, the east part of which is on the Verizon property, which I know has been a discussion throughout this process. DOT had comments basically to maximize the number of bike ped connections over US 29. The comment about Fairland Town Center here was, as I understand it, meant to be sort of emblematic of that general goal. So if you agree, we could go about this in a couple ways. We could have this be in addition to the plan-wide recommendations just to maximize the bike ped connectivity across US 29, connecting activity centers, particularly at Fairland Town Center and Paint Branch High School. Or we could sort of talk about this more in the context of the district recommendations that we'll get to in a little while. I'm inclined to think that it might be better to go through this with the district recommendations, but happy to talk about it now if we'd prefer to put it in plan-wide.
Any views from planning on whether it's done district by district or whether we address this plan-wide?
Clark Larson again for the record. If we're talking about this one road and crossing, I would think it is appropriate to list in the district just as far as organizational purposes. We did tend to look at plan-wide transportation recommendations that might affect the entire plan area or larger areas in the plan-wide chapter. So that doesn't mean we can't talk about it now, but I might recommend that it be written into the district for the Fairland section.
Is there a language that you think is needed from a plan-wide perspective to address this on a more macro level, or do you think addressing it at the district level would be sufficient?
Tanya Stern, Acting Planning Director with the Planning Department. I concur with Clark's recommendation to include it in the district chapter, the district sections, but I think it would be beneficial to have some language in the plan-wide section because this is really about emphasizing a policy direction about maximizing the pedestrian access. So I think it's important to put that in the plan-wide section, and then in the district section you can talk more specifically about, where there may be opportunities to do that or different ways to do that.
Yeah, that would be my inclination, that there's a conceptual dynamic here of what we're trying to accomplish from a plan-wide perspective, and then there's a specific dynamic in the district of an actual shopping center and being bisected by a major highway, and how do we address that and what should be required, in the redevelopment process. So, okay.
And this came about during conversations after this packet was put together. So I'm happy to kind of work with planning and DOT staff to get some more specific language before the next work session or before this goes to council. We'll
Okay,
keep
great.
you
Unless there's
posted on that.
any objection from Councilmember Jawanda, I think that's where Councilmember Fonnie Gonzalez and I are.
No objection. No
Okay,
objection.
great. All right, let's continue that.
Great. The next item is on the expanded Briggs Cheney Road Bridge. This is recommendation number 2. The current plan calls for a linear pathway or public plaza to be built sort of as a second bridge parallel to this bridge to provide a comfortable pedestrian and bicyclist connection. If I may, I might suggest turning to the district recommendation map 26 on page 74 to understand the context area for this pedestrian pathway. You'll see on that map that there is a proposed side path from Paint Branch High School along Briggs Cheney Road. We'll talk about that side path in particular when we get to the district recommendations, but just for your understanding and context of why I think planning suggested having this linear pathway here. The only, comment I have on it is that, this is a remarkably wide bridge as is, and there might be opportunities to, instead of, building an additional bridge, or expanding the bridge rather, which the fiscal impact statement flags at 23.8 million. That's just for county. Yes, that's just county costs. Whereas the interim measure that is proposed in the meantime to reconfigure the road to make Vision Zero improvements in general and complete street improvements in general, and to repurpose the existing right of way only comes out at about 4.3 million in county costs, about another 4.3 in state costs. So, my recommendation from council staff is to, instead of expanding the bridge, to save some, of that future CIP, burden, and actually, maybe have some traffic calming or, Vision Zero benefits at the same time by, instead of expanding the bridge, to convert some of the existing travel lanes into this, linear plaza or pathway, which, is a great idea. And really fits into the plan. I've had some conversations with DOT and planning on this, where I'll let them speak for themselves. But in terms of both, future anticipated cost on the FIS and in terms of traffic calming, I think this might be the better way to go.
Let's hear from planning and then from DOT.
Great. Again, Clark Larson with Montgomery Planning. I think it's worth explaining that this recommendation is really part of a two-part approach for this bridge on Briggs Cheney Road. So there's another recommendation, I'll note it here, 3C27, I believe it's on page 47, which does talk about reconfiguration, lane markings, safety improvements, bigger spaces for bike and pedestrian use on Briggs Cheney Road. And that, in our minds, is maybe a medium interim approach for improving the travel along the bridge. So that would be within the existing bridge deck, the existing bridge as it's designed today. So we agree with council staff that there's opportunities to improve the bridge lane widths, how much space is dedicated to people rolling and biking across, walking across. This recommendation, 3C23, which does in the plan say expand the Briggs Cheney Road Bridge, is really in our mind about a greater vision or a bigger approach to possibly add a parallel new bridge feature, but create more space on this crossing of US 29 that would tie into side paths coming from the east and west side of the bridge, potentially also expanding into public gathering space, public use space, sort of a park on top of US 29. So that if you take away the word expand the bridge here, there really is no other area in the plan that would speak to that. If that is your inclination to retain the vision of an expanded bridge, and it's sort of a big picture item. It doesn't happen all over the place. We found some examples near the Warren Wilson Bridge in Alexandria. They have wide landscaped pathways on either side. Philadelphia has a lot of essentially parks, side paths alongside their bridges that cross interstates in the city. So there are examples of this happening. I don't know if there's examples of retrofitting existing bridges. This might happen as part of new bridge construction. But we really wanted to have this longer term improvement included in the plan that, is a big ticket item. It would cost a lot of money, would take a lot of inputs from various levels of government, I think, to really make it happen, but would improve that cross US 29 approach, the crossings of US 29 between primarily Paint Branch High School students and to the east where they live, walk to shop for lunch. There really is an active crossing here that we think deserves more space for those users. So I would just explain it in that sort of.
So the rub here essentially is there's agreement that there is a medium interim approach, which both planning staff and council staff seem to agree on. The question is whether that is a more cost-effective alternative to achieve a similar goal, or whether there should be a longer-term, much more expensive project to actually expand the bridge. So the question is, do we want to take this opportunity to say, let's focus on a more cost-effective alternative that you see as an interim measure? Council staff thinks it could be a permanent measure. I just want to make sure I'm understanding that. Or whether you want to look to this as being an intermediate measure, but keep and maintain a long-term goal of a much more expensive, more elaborate project to actually expand the bridge. So am I framing that correctly, Council staff?
Just about. Let me just clarify sort of what I was getting at there, and happy to provide some language that sort of clarifies that and gets at some of what planning staff is talking about. My intention for this was to essentially combine these the intermediate, the short, medium, and long-term measures into one long-ish term project to convert to, instead of building, instead of reconfiguring the existing bridge and then expanding it to include the linear parkway or pathway or plaza, to instead have that linear plaza be on the existing bridge right of way, and in so doing, do the traffic calming and reconfiguration that the intermediate measures suggest.
All right. Ms. Stern. Thank you, Mr. Kenny. Ms. Stern.
I think just to emphasize, with master plans, they take years, sometimes decades to fully implement, and I think it's important to include both the interim recommendation as well as keep the longer term vision of expanding the bridge, because at some point in the future the bridge might be replaced, and I think it's really important, or we think it's very important, to make sure that if that should occur, it could be years into the future, there's some clear direction about what that design of a future bridge could be. And so I think if we take out the reference to expanding a bridge to include all the components that we want, you could include that in the future, but I think it's really important to lay that out as a policy direction at this point while we are doing this master plan, so that it is there, in the event that the bridge is replaced in the future. Because bridge replacements do occur at some point.
Do we have any understanding of what the shelf life of the bridge? I mean, we generally know when bridges get replaced. They have a shelf life. Sometimes they last a little shorter, sometimes they last a little longer, but generally we know, right?
That's right. I think my understanding is that this bridge is fairly new. It's, 10, 15 years old? Yeah. So I don't think it's going to be replaced very soon. But we agree with Acting Director Stern in that the two recommendations are a good idea. So.
Okay. Well, if there's I appreciate the council staff recommendation. I think the challenge here is we tend to put a lot of very expensive things in master plans, and we're not always so good at actually fulfilling them. And so I do think we should be mindful of setting unrealistic expectations to the community that a hugely expensive bridge project is likely at some point during the plan period of even in the next 25 or so years. So I appreciate that's where I think council staff was coming from, but if there's consensus between Department of Transportation and Planning, I'm happy to yield to them. Councilmember Jawanda, did you have
No, I
any
just
thoughts on this?
don't snatch consensus from the jaw. What is it? What's your line that you normally say?
Yeah, conflict from the jaws of consensus.
There you go.
All right, so we'll keep it as is, but it's a thoughtful recommendation from Mr. Kenny and appreciate it, but we're going to keep it as is. Let's continue.
Moving on to the transit network recommendations. There's a lot of great recommendations here in terms of frequency, in terms of sort of rerouting stops, in terms of prioritization. But sort of the crux of this section is that, while these are recommendations here, the ultimate decision making on what this BRT system is going to look like will be, the plan expresses deference towards the existing US 29 BRT study phase 2 that's going on south of Tech Road, and recommends extending that study to include north of Tech Road to include all these recommendations. My only recommendation for that differs from the planning language is to include a stronger preference for a dedicated median running bus lane because given that this is sort of an anchor of the rest of the plan, because currently the study, and I could be wrong here, but my current read of the Phase 2 BRT study has this section north of Tech Road on US 29 being a shoulder running bus lane, which from what I understand is not terribly different than what happens right now. So that would be my recommendation, is to include stronger language on prioritizing a dedicated median running bus lane.
Thoughts from planning and then from DOT?
Yeah, just briefly, I would agree with council staff. We do, as a department, we were seeking to take a measured approach, knowing that there's no final result to the study south of Tech Road on what treatments should take place on US 29. If council members are interested in taking a more emphatic approach, really establishing that center running median BRT is really part of the future for this highway corridor north of Tech Road, we would support that. I think that was our preference, but we wanted to leave it open to, it probably needs some study to know what impacts, whether it would serve people getting on and off the bus, how it would impact traffic. So without having done that north of Tech Road within this plan area, we wanted to make a statement about we think median running might be ideal, but isn't the necessary preferred approach. But we're open to the conversation.
Let's turn to DOT.
Yeah, I think we mostly are agreeing that median preference is fine. We've Thrive established the same. There was a vote here at council a couple months back, I think, that reaffirmed the same, and we're on board with that as well. As a preference, of course, details and design might find something different, but that's our.
So you're
our idea.
comfortable with the language as proposed by council staff?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was just going to mention that, and I have been pushing for this at 355 BRT as well as Route 29. We should set out for what we want. We can, studies oftentimes have mixed analysis of what they can mean. There's a push and a pull to almost everything when it comes to transportation planning. But, ultimately, if we're trying to create boulevards, if we're trying to address both land use and safety for all road users, there are choices that are preferred. And it doesn't mean always, but a preference is a preference. It's not a requirement, and so I think it makes sense to me. It sounds like Councilmember Fonte Gonzalez. We got a thumbs up from Councilmember Joando, so we will accept council staff recommendation on that one. All right, let's continue, Mr. Kenny.
The jaws of consensus.
There
Awesome.
you go.
Next, and this is the final point that I wanted to bring up on the transportation plan-wide recommendations, is this isn't a recommendation, but it's a conversation I think worth having based on concerns expressed by DOT. The transportation analysis for this plan, as I think DOT mentioned earlier, reflects a 14% increase in accessibility by transit and a 6% decrease in accessibility by car. DOT wanted to note, and I'm sure they'll express this further, that there are, we might want to look at whether that is adequate as sort of a balancing. I tend to agree with the original planning language. it seems to be in line with the adequacy standards set forth in the growth and infrastructure policy, but happy to open that point up for discussion.
Great. Well, why don't we turn to planning and then to DOT, and you can comment on that.
I guess just a question for council staff. Did you say those percentages were recommended or found as that was sort of the result of our modeling? We're not recommending those percentages. Is that
Yes,
Okay.
Use the wrong language, but yes.
okay? Really, the only recommendation that we're making here is for a non-auto driver mode share of 30% as a goal to be attained. Really, the 6% decrease in jobs accessibility by car, 14% increase in transit accessibility is the result of our regional traffic modeling. So that's really all I have to say about that. That's just what we think would happen by 2045. Should the zoning changes occur, should development really plan wide, if development responds to that new zoning and builds out to the theoretical maximum, that's what we would expect. Often, plan areas don't build out to the maximum extent allowable, so you're not going to see that level of traffic, transit, bike use because we don't think the maximum development will happen. That's really the only caveat I would say. Otherwise, I don't know if there's anything we would respond to.
Mr. Balsi?
Andrew Balsi again, Montgomery County DOT. So master plans, they are operating under, I guess, performance metrics from guidance that came out of the Fed committee a couple years ago. And we're just raising awareness that those metrics say everything has to improve, auto metrics and transit metrics. We're not saying objecting that one of them worsens, but just raising awareness for council to weigh. This kind of ties back to the interchange discussion, that technically we don't meet the guidance that was set forward a couple years back. But it does open the door to, we are actually working, planning in DOT on developing new master plan metrics that we hope will resolve that and get some more definition and detail and action. If anything, based on the interchange discussion earlier, and if that's settled, then this is really just a heads up that, hey, we're working on solving this for future plans.
Appreciate that. Could you just quickly describe how we define auto access and transit access? Like how are we dictating that?
So again, for the record, Chris Van Alstyne. The long story short, we have a regional model. It's called the Travel 4 model. We take all the land use data, all the jobs, all the population from the entire DC metro region. We plug that into the model and see how many, particularly for jobs, how many jobs are accessible within, I believe there was it 45 minutes from the origin, from a particular user's origin, and then average that across the policy area. Then we do the same thing for transit riders as well. So it is a comparison between the two uses.
But I guess my question is, like, for instance, in like a place like Pike and Rose, there's a lot less parking right in front of the former Toys R Us site that was there, or Silver Diner, which was originally there. Or La Madeleine, I could name, the shop, or the nail salon, or, we could go through it. But there are fewer parking spaces directly in front. There's just the frontage spaces or no spaces. But there's structured parking. There's actually more parking, in certain parts of that area. So the question is, like, at what point is auto access improved or decreased? Like, of course, structured parking is a more urban dynamic, but it might not be right in front of where you're going, which is a more suburban dynamic.
And I guess the point is, so when we say access, is not necessarily how easy it is to drive someplace. It's really just that time component. And unfortunately, there's nothing in the model that tells you how easy it is to get to someplace. It's all just time-based. Things like parking availability is not in the, at least not something that we use in our model. It's really just kind of a global land use. So how many jobs are in a particular coded area? How many people live in that area? So it's really just about how long does it take, on average, users in that area to get to their destination. And it's not so much about ease of use. If that helps.
Again, Clark Larson with Montgomery Planning. I would add to that, I think Chris was starting to get to the point I want to make, which is a big element of this access is the land use, the locations on property. So a big part of it, not the only part of it, because there's certainly transportation infrastructure and roads and delay and all that built in. A big part of it is how many jobs are in a given area to be accessed. And one element that I've understood as in this forecast comparing what zones are in place today that would allow certain land uses and development and what zones we are recommending in this plan, which really allow a lot more mixes of uses and essentially more housing units as well. There is a decrease in the potential maximum build-out of office and employment in this area. So less potential for employment growth versus some employment growth, but a lot more homes that could be built in this plan area. So in my mind, that is one factor decreasing that job accessibility rate for vehicles, because there's a lot less potential new office buildings and employment and retail shops that could be built here versus a lot more homes. So I think the land use component is important.
I mean, the metrics are paper, like some of this is paper dynamics, not dynamics on the ground, because
yes, it's all
the
potential.
strip mall office park that this was previously zoned in certain places have not been built. You don't expect to be built. They're being rezoned for different purposes.
Well, even in the existing zoning forecast, we're assuming that some property will build out to that maximum extent. What's the FAR today? A lot of employment office
Right. The data is looking at what could be built, not
Yes.
what is built or is likely to be built.
Well, there's a baseline of what's there today. That was back in 2015 as our baseline.
Right.
Building out with the future traffic and everything. But then the other two scenarios were, what would happen if we built out to the existing zoning districts and the existing growth in transportation use versus what would happen if we build out in the recommended zones and their different ratio of jobs to housing and FARs and the like, including the future growth in transportation. So really looked at three different scenarios.
Right. I just think it's important. So what you're saying, just the 14% increase and 66% decrease are a hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
They're not necessarily
Completely
a reality on the ground. And so, we're not necessarily changing to what could be or might be hypothetically. The question is, what do we think is going to happen, and how do we change the actual reality on the
They're
ground?
educated guesses.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
you're working on it. There's collaboration here. I don't think there's really a recommendation. This is more of a flagging, so we're aware, since the prior committee chair sent a letter noting that the intention, the goal, is to improve everything, although, that might not always be possible. Okay, let's continue.
That's it for transportation plan wide.
Okay. Any other comments on the transportation side of this from DOT or planning? Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Kenny. Good job. Well done. And let's, I believe, turn it over to Ms. Dunn, and we can go through the land use side of things, district by district.
Great, thank you. Yes, good afternoon. So there are two staff reports that were for today. One was primarily from Mr. Kenny, and it looked at the plan-wide transportation recommendations. So now we're starting it on the second staff report, and what we're going to cover are the recommendations related to the district level analysis of the plan area. The plan is broken into 3 separate districts, and so we will look at about half of the area today. Actually, it's only one of 3 districts, but it will comprise a lot of what's changing, so we'll focus on that. And just for kind of a big picture overview, I think it's important to set a stage for when we start to talk about one current existing zone versus a proposed zone. What do we expect through zoning in general? What is it trying to achieve? The big picture of this is that across the 3 districts, there are 71. I called them zoning blocks. They're basically, or map numbers. They are congregations of properties. Sometimes it's one property, particularly if it's a large property, and sometimes it can be up to 6 properties that all have currently the same zoning and then are also recommended for the same type of zone, even though it might be a change in zone under the master plan. Another thing to keep in mind is when you see the zoning blocks, you look at the table, you usually see one of 3 things happening. One is that the plan is recommending what's called a reconfirmation of zoning. It says today the zone is, say, R90. And this plan proposes to keep R90. So we are reconfirming that that is the correct zoning for these properties. The other thing that you might see is a change from, say, a current townhouse zone, like in our current zone, we might call them R10, which is a townhouse zone. But the zoning code that was rewritten in 2014 doesn't retain our old townhouse zones, has created new ones, townhouse low density, townhouse medium density, and townhouse high density. And so any master plan since 2014 has come through and translated those zones. You will see that as well. They're just really getting at what is, how is this environment built today under a prior zone, so what does it look like, and we will, in a sense, reconfirm it. And then the last is really where you're recommending a zoning change, and the plan does have recommended zoning changes. I think there are 42 of the 71 blocks recommend a change in zoning, and that is to get at sometimes an increase in density and or height and or uses. And we will go through those. And also just to keep in mind when we see, primarily those changes in zoning are coming through a change to a CR family of zones, either CRN, CRT, or CR. And the plan also includes language, which most of our master plans do, that indicate to the public that the commercial residential town and the commercial residential zones allow for higher density under the county's optional method of development. And they require public amenities to support this additional density. This ensures the right mix. Ensuring the right mix of public benefits is a key to realizing the plan's goals of a more equitable, economically healthy, and environmentally resilient community. So what the plan sets out to do. Council staff is on page 2 of the staff report. I just want to also emphasize it's not only that you get the right mix of public benefits, but that a plan can actually achieve projects that move forward that require public benefits. And that gets to whether or not the zoning that's being proposed can trigger the optional method of development. In the CRT zone, optional method is triggered at the greater of either 1 FAR requested in your development application or 10,000 square feet. And for the CR zone, it's a 0.5 FAR, 10,000 square feet, the greater of. So with that, we're going to move into the districts. That's sort of the high level of what we look at, what we consider when we analyze the zoning. In the districts, there are the 3 districts I mentioned. There's the Columbia Pike Corridor, the Main Street Corridor, and the Residential Neighborhoods District. On page 3 of the staff report, I have a copy to map out of the master plan so that people that are looking through here can quickly see kind of how those are oriented to each other. And today's work session really just focuses on the Columbia Pike Corridor District. We will get to the Main Street and the neighborhood districts at the next work section. And as you can see, the Columbia Pike Corridor is comprised of properties that are situated along Columbia Pike, which is also Route 29, and Old Columbia Pike. The development today is low-density suburban commercial businesses and shopping centers with a handful of larger institutions and buildings, office buildings. At the top of page 4, staff report, it copies from the plan. What is the vision for the area? It's important to keep that vision in mind when we're considering what zoning would be appropriate to achieve that vision. And the vision for this area is for a compact neighborhood-focused development along Old Columbia Pike within about a 5-minute walk of different activity centers. And we were actually going to go through each activity center individually. And there are 4 of them. They are located at major intersections, one with Briggs Cheney Road, one with Fairland Road, one with Musgrove Road, and one with East Randolph Road. And at the southern end, there is a gateway, community gateway, at the intersection with Tech Road. So before jumping into the specific activity centers and what those recommendations are, the plan does provide district-wide recommendations for the Columbia Pike Corridor. Those are listed on page 4. Council staff is in agreement with the planning board recommendation for the corridor-wide recommendations for this district.
Could we just quickly go through and explain the type of activity center and what the definitions mean? Because I think it's important. This was a major topic of discussion in Thrive, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in the way that the concept of activity center is discussed. So I just think for a level setting, I think it would be helpful if Ms. Donna, maybe
Sure.
if planning could just walk through, or you could walk through either way.
I'll start, and they can certainly just chime in. What I'll say is when we adopted Thrive, it has in it a growth map that has activity centers, and they are example activity centers. They are neighborhood activity centers. In the staff report here, I went through and looked at those activity centers. I looked at the types of zoning that occur in neighborhood centers, the intensity of FAR in those activity centers. They are smaller areas, the neighborhood zones. In here somewhere. They are places like Damascus, and that's the smaller one. Well, before I get to that, I'll just say that the neighborhood ones are relatively small. Colesville, Cloverly, I know for a fact those are neighborhood centers. The density or the zoning tends to be neighborhood retail or commercial residential neighborhood, and occasionally some commercial residential town zoning. FARs are relatively small, like a 0.5 to a 1.5 FAR. The next size is called is like smaller activity center. Think Damascus, I think Aspen Hill. Those densities tend to go up a little bit. They tend to have CRT zoning, occasionally CRN. And then from there we move to a medium center. There again, the densities go up a little higher. Those centers are larger. Think of, can't remember them right off the top of my head, but the idea being, I want to get this point across, because I do mention them in here, we can go through it, are that when Thrive was created, that growth map and gave those examples for places that exist today. So when we think about a neighborhood center or a smaller center, and we look at those place names, that's how we kind of think of those places today. When we're reviewing a master plan, we're using terms like a neighborhood center, a medium center, a smaller center. We're thinking the vision. So while we might look at a map and say, okay, this area doesn't really seem like it should fit a smaller activity center, it's not quite big enough, or it doesn't quite have the intensity, but it's not what's there today, it's what the plan's envisioning for the future. Planning Wayne, if they add to that.
I think Ms. Dawn has covered that pretty well. If you have any other questions, we're happy to discuss it, but I think you described it pretty well.
All right, let's continue through the packet. Thank you. I just think it's important because this was a major topic of hearing the idea of an activity center in your community and having a certain view of what the appropriate context and growth pattern in that community is, and even what could be expected in the future. And once I read the definition of some of the types of activity centers, it did align in many ways with certain communities. But when we talked about it in the broader sense, it was hard to connect. So I just think it's important to set the expectation understanding while we talk about it. So let's continue.
Okay. I apologize, couldn't remember exact examples, but we do have them in the staff report, so we should hit on those as we move through. Okay, so the first of the 4 activity centers that make up the Columbia Pike corridor is the one at Old Columbia Pike and Briggs Cheney Road. And this, in the plan, it says that it is envisioned as a mixed-use neighborhood serving center consistent with smaller centers as shown in Thrive. And again, as Thrive defines it, smaller centers are generally characterized by low to medium density residential neighborhoods with clusters of commercial activity, including shopping centers and neighborhood serving retail. After that, the plan does provide some general recommendations for this activity center. Those are located on page 5 of the staff report. The first one is just really about that it's to encourage redevelopment of properties to a compact mixed-use neighborhood serving center, fronting on streets, pedestrian-friendly, good landscaping, things that we expect in our walkable neighborhoods and community gathering spaces, and council staff supports this recommendation. Okay. The second recommendation is related to the side path along the east side of Old Columbia Pike on the north side of Briggs Cheney Road, and I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Kenny.
Yeah, so this is a continuation of the conversation about the Briggs Cheney Road Bridge. This side path would be a wide, comfortable facility for pedestrians and bicyclists, sort of off the current right-of-way. My recommendation is to, similarly with the bridge, to do this on existing right-of-way on Briggs Cheney Road, and in so doing also accomplish some traffic calming goals. I think in our conversations since this packet language came out, council staff's idea is actually quite similar to those from planning and DOT. In fact, I would like to just clarify that my changing of the term from create a side path to improve the sidewalk is not material. What is material is whether or not this project should include traffic calming work within it. And that, I think, might be worth a discussion. My recommendation would be to include traffic calming work as a component rather than just the side path.
Appreciate that. Let's hear from planning and then from DOT.
Yeah, Clark Larson, Montgomery Planning. So we agree with council staff. Traffic calming is important. I think it could be included in the way recommended by staff. We were intentional in calling for a side path versus an expanded sidewalk. Generally, the sidewalk would be right along the curb, just maybe wider. A side path would be buffered from the road. Having landscaping or trees separated from the road is really more of a walking and biking and rolling facility. And this would be consistent with what the bicycle master plan currently calls for. So that was very intentional language versus just expanding the sidewalk. But I think as council staff notes, that's really not the main point of what they were trying to get to with these revisions. So we would support their revisions except for the sidewalk inclusion.
Yeah. And if I may, Kristen Austin again for the record, if we could have the traffic calming as a separate recommendation. I mean, it is important. We do believe that there's other recommendations and policies in place that do support that as it is, but if we want an explicit recommendation for traffic calming, we can include that. As it is, we do want to keep the recommendation for the side path basically as simple as possible, because we do just want to keep that. We literally just want a side path, and that's a reflection of the existing bicycle master plan. The one concern I would have if we combine the recommendations, the recommendation for the traffic calming, is that it could somehow interfere with implementation of the side path. If, say, for instance, a private developer comes in up the road, it could be misconstrued as them being required to do traffic calming on the Briggs Cheney Road, and that would be a hindrance to actually accomplishing the shorter term vision. So, long story short, I think we agree with the idea of the traffic calming, but we would want that to be a separate.
Right, separate it out, but include the side path, because that's consistent with the bike master plan and creates the buffer and the safest condition, which is the ultimate goal. Any comments from DOT? Mr. Bossi?
This is quick. No, we agree with what Chris said. Separate items, I think, would be really good.
Okay, so I think there's agreement here. If you could work on that language with council staff, but that makes sense, and it sounds like there's general consensus here. So let's have two separate, but include traffic calming. I think it's a good suggestion, but we'll keep side path as the formal recommendation, because the buffer is very important. As somebody who represents an area, just like Councilmember Fani Gonzalez, on a lot of state highways with no buffer and the deadly consequences of what that means, I very much appreciate the interest and insistence on the side path specifically. And I know Councilmember Fani Gonzalez agrees and has done a lot of work in that arena as well. Okay, let's continue.
Great. Thank you. So I'm on page 6 of the staff report. It provides a copy of the mapped area for this activity center, and it also has a copy of the zoning table from the master plan. I just wanted to note for the committee that we did receive testimony on this activity center. We received a letter from the Greater Colesville Citizens Association. They said that the neighborhood center, I think because of the way it was described, confused it as being recommended for a neighborhood center, not a smaller center, but also did not support that it should be labeled as a unique activity center. And what the staff report notes is that, in fact, the plan did note it as a smaller activity center. And this is where I do have the examples. The smaller ones, as we can think about them, are areas like Damascus, Hillendale, Kensington, and Forest Glen. And they are characterized with the zoning I had mentioned earlier: neighborhood retail, commercial residential neighborhood, and commercial residential town, with these densities of 0.75 and a 1 FAR. Those are neighborhoods. The smaller centers are predominantly CRT, with densities ranging from 1 to 2.5. There's a table on page 7. It shows the current zoning, proposed zoning, and in this table providing the size of the zoning blocks, and what the current maximum FAR is total, and then what the proposed would be, and then what it would be under a mixed-use scenario. So the total maximum under of commercial or residential under the mixed-use zone. And so just a couple comments from council staff. The first one is that, as recommended, the map numbers 1B and 1C have a proposed height of 75 feet, yet are recommended for CRN zoning, which has a maximum of 65 feet allowed in the zone. So it's not able to reach 75. So there are really two options for the committee to think about. One is to retain the height at 65 feet and retain it as a CRN zone recommendation. The opposite would be to move from a CRN zone to a CRT zone and retain the 75 feet in height. You turn the page, council staff suggests retaining the CRN zone and keeping the height at the maximum that zone allows, which is 65 feet. Recognizing that if you go back to the map on page 6 and you look at this activity center, which is really highlighted in the outlines that are the hollow circles, the main part of it is the kind of pinky purple properties there in the very middle. But property number 3, map number 3, is it's under an overlay zone for the upper paint branch protection area and has a very restrictive cap on impervious surface. And for that reason alone, if the two prominent parts of an intersection, right, so really you have 4 quadrants here, you're really recommending mixed-use zoning that can be achieved at any higher level on that 1 quadrant out of 4. I would stick with CRN zoning, and I would keep the height at 65 feet, and I would call it a neighborhood activity center. It's the only one of the ones that you'll hear in this corridor where not thinking it should be expanded, basically because of its location next to the protective area.
Planning?
Clark Larson, Montgomery Planning again. I would just thank council staff for finding our error. It's true that 65 is the maximum height in CRN, so we're happy to change it to that. That was our intent.
Okay, well, no objections here. Let's take that, but before we do, let's turn it to Councilmember Mink.
Thanks. Yeah, just a question about that zone 3 there versus the other ones. Do we have concerns about zone 3 having the height requirement of 45 versus the other ones of having 65? Any concerns about that?
I think that if you go back and look at the mapping, and planning staff can definitely speak to this, my guess is that the lower height was because that zoning block actually borders single-family detached house zoning in a different way than the block catty corner across the intersection, and therefore was recognizing that a slightly smaller height may be more appropriate in that quadrant. I'll let them speak to that.
That's right. Yeah, I see adjacency wanting to step down to neighborhoods.
Got it. Thank you.
And before we go on, if we go back to page 4, there was a reference to the TDRs in the overlay zone that I think we skipped over, and I just want to see if we could explain that quickly. So we're comfortable with that recommendation. Thank you for that. There's consensus on it. But before we move forward, I just wanted to make sure I flagged that and just got an explanation for that.
Sure. Back on page 4 where we covered the district-wide recommendations for this corridor, the last bullet is revise the transferable development right overlay zone to exclude the interchange of US 29 with MD 200 right-of-way. And the reason
and that's just because there's no development there.
Exactly. It was at one point not considered it would take up that much property. It in fact does. It's owned by SHA, and there will be no residential development potential on that land.
Okay, so you're just removing it from the receiving area because it's not going to be redeveloped.
Correct, and it gives the wrong impression that it's a potential.
Okay, all right. I thought that. I just wanted to make sure. So okay. Let's continue. Let's move forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have basically covered the first activity center of this Columbia Pike corridor. The second one is Old Columbia Pike and Fairland Road Activity Center. Again, the plan says it is envisioned as a mixed-use neighborhood serving center consistent with the smaller centers as shown in Thrive. There's a map just shows you it in context to the corridor. And then it again has some general recommendations before it gets into its zoning recommendations. Those general recommendations again are what does that activity center going to look like? Council staff suggests the committee support that recommendation. The second one has to do with the town center and street design concept, and I'm going to turn that back over to Mr. Kenny.
This is just some context for the record for a brief summary of what it means to have a town center designation. It's spelled out in greater detail in the Complete Streets Design Guide, but is a dense document. So just wanted to provide that here for quick reference. I agree with the language.
Okay, without objection, let's continue.
Great. And then the third recommendation for this activity center area in general is related to the Fairland Center, and that is when it is not a holding school, that MCPS should consider short-term leasing of this space to other users, again, trying to create community. And so council staff also suggests the committee support this recommendation.
Okay, any comments? Nope, without objection.
I just, Mr.
Oh,
Chairman.
sorry, I thought it was a thumbs up, but it was a finger to.
Well, it was both.
Councilmember Jawanda.
Yeah, thank you. This was the recommendation on the MCPS holding.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to council staff and thank you to planning. This is an important, I just want to make this point here that we are always in need of extra space for activities, and I think this is a great acknowledgement of that fact, and I hope we can continue to do this in other plans and actually make some progress on it. So and actualize it, because it's an important thing. So just wanted to point that out, and appreciate that as not only a member of this committee, but with my other hat as the Education Committee Chair. Thank you.
Thank you to the chair of the Education and Culture Committee to point that out, and agreed, and without objection, we will move forward.
Great, thank you. Okay, so on page 9, where we are now, you'll see the copy of the proposed zoning map for the old Columbia Pike and Fairland Road Activity Center, and with it are map numbered blocks 5A through 8A. When you turn the page, you'll see those taken straight from the master plan at the top of page 10. We received testimony again from the Greater Colesville Citizens Association related to this activity center designation. It doesn't believe it should be designated an activity center, although council staff believes that I think it is much more likely a smaller center, as the other ones that we know in Thrive already exist. It can achieve that given its size and the number of properties and its potential for development in the plan. And again, listing some of those smaller activity centers. For context, we have Hillendale, Forest Glen, Kensington, and again, those FARs go from 1 to 2.5 FAR, which I think are in line. The big takeaways from when you look at all of these proposed zoning changes for this activity center are that they're moving from, many of them, from a strictly residential zone like R90 or what we think of as a predominantly or almost only commercial zone like neighborhood retail to a mixed-use zone of CRN or CRT. So just in that move alone, you're going to see that there's a potential for a type of use that wasn't there before, going from residential to commercial and vice versa. And then going to the CR family of zones, you know that there's a better form that will be coming with that, because there's very specific form standards in our code for the CR family of zones. So both of those changes are very beneficial and will help create these as activity centers with the type of environment that's envisioned in the plan and that are discussed in the general recommendations. However, when you look a little more carefully at the densities that's proposed, there's really only a modest increase in density that's being proposed, and the increase is for total density. So the only way that you'll actually be able to achieve additional density is if you do mix use on your property, and we just know from experience that not every property redevelops in a community chooses to do so as mixed use. And we know that even more recently, sometimes it can be difficult for an all residential project to come forward and feel comfortable putting ground floor retail in, not sure whether they can lease it, rent it, and so they want to come forward as a fully residential project. If that were the case here, the ones in the table don't have an increase in their residential density. It's the same. May have been only commercial before, but still there's no increase in density. And then given about half of the zoning blocks are proposed for CRN zoning, and the other half are for CRT, and this gets at the evaluation of public amenities and public benefit points. For CRN zoning, there's only standard method development that can occur. For CRT zoning, You can have standard method if you are a 1 FAR or less in your intensity of development. If you're over that, then you have to go through optional method, and there will be the provision of some public benefits for that project. But as the table sits, and as it's proposed, I believe there's only 2 properties, the first 2, 5A and 5B, that could actually achieve optional method development because they have a total density of 1.5 FAR. The rest are either capped at a 1 FAR or they're CRN zoning. So staff thinks it's worth the committee considering and talking to planning staff to see whether the potential for a little more additional density to these zones is appropriate to ensure for the community that we get some public benefits in return for these projects.
So I want to hear from planning, but I just want to follow-up question on this. So I don't quite follow the dynamic of if you're not doing mixed use, if it's just residential, that it doesn't increase
So
the
if you
density.
go,
Because if we're going from R90 or R200
right.
to CRN, I mean, I don't see a
So if
scenario where
you-
that doesn't increase the density. But
Right,
unless
if you
I'm
go
missing
back to
something.
page 10, take an R90, take the very first one. The residential FAR is a 0.75. Actually, we don't ever think about the R90 zone in terms of FAR. We always think of it in units per acres, 1 unit per 9,000 square feet. But when we think that 30% of the property can get covered with square feet, right? A house can cover 30% of your lot, and given the heights in the zones, they can be about 2.5 stories. So if you do the math of what can get covered and how tall it can be, an R90 zone produces about a 0.75 FAR house. So if you had a large area and you could produce multiple, property, units on it, on average, you would get about a 0.75 FAR yield on that area. The same is what's being recommended if you look at the proposed zoning. The R is 0.75. Now, the form is going to be different, right? Because if you go to townhouse or even a small mixed-use building, you can get a different form of your housing, but you're still getting 0.75 square feet of housing.
Got it. Okay. I've never heard it discussed that way, but it's an interesting way to look at it. But I appreciate you explaining it in that way. Okay, let's hear from planning and your general thought process. On the one hand, I understand the council staff recommendation here is to say if you increase the density and you trigger optional method development, it allows for essentially extractions, public benefits from redevelopment, and it doesn't require that happens. You could still go through standard method. It would just give an option to do more and for the public to get more benefits out of it. On the other hand, that's true of any place anywhere in the county that is standard method that has lower density. Like, we could argue that we should never do standard method for that very same reason. So could you just explain the recommendation, provide your general thought process, and then express any reactions to the council staff recommendation?
I can start. Clark Larson with Montgomery Planning. I think it's useful to look at the analysis that council staff prepared. It reminds me of when we were looking at this maybe a year ago and how to conceive of these recommended zones and the approach here. I think one aspect of thinking about the types of zones and densities and FARs that are appropriate here is to look at, are we potentially incentivizing future development? Are we allowing property owners to recapture that value that they have? And will optional method be a part of that? We also brought into consideration other elements. I think in these smaller activity centers on Old Columbia Pike, we didn't see them as the areas with the most potential or need for development. We're really thinking more in this plan area about what is the potential on Briggs Cheney Road, the entire corridor there, down at Tech Road. And so while we do think there is, it would be useful for some of these properties to intensify and provide more walkable amenities to nearby neighborhoods, we didn't look at it through the lens solely of, will this help to incentivize development? Will this require public benefits as part of optional development method? I think we're open to some adjustments to these properties. Not large increases in FAR. Even if you boost some of the 1.0 FAR's total to 1.25, that does provide the potential for optional method to be captured and public benefits to come in should the property owner, should a developer partner seek to realize that maximum potential. I don't know that I would recommend all properties to just go up in density and FAR to be able to qualify for optional development method. I think we would have to look more specifically about, are we adjacent to neighborhoods? Is there interchange nearby that would limit the potential? Is there a public school on one side of the corner? So there's limitations on some of these intersections that you wouldn't necessarily be able to build out to maximum. So that would be just my first take on the multivariate approach. Besides just looking at optional development method, I think that's one aspect to think about. But I think that's a reason why we wouldn't want to just upzone higher FARs everywhere here in the smaller activity centers.
Appreciate that. And I'll just note, this is an area that has not seen a lot of investment. And that part of the concept of the plan, from my perspective, is to generate investment in an underinvested area. When we look at some of the challenges facing the county, the disinvestment of swaths of the county over long periods of time has created some of the many challenges that we face, and we're hearing communities screaming for that type of investment. And so there is a delicate balance of wanting to incentivize investment, which in and of itself has public benefits, and getting additional public benefits and extractions from it as well. But I just wanted to note that. I would personally be interested in seeing what planning thinks are areas, if there are areas that don't make sense for this and areas that do. But let me turn it to Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
I will just follow up with your comments from the chair. I think if we can just have the planning staff with council staff to review this and then come back, that will be the easier thing, and just to move forward. Thank you.
If I can jump in,
Mr.
Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez just said basically what we were going to say, which is to let us work with the council staff to look at this in more detail, and we can come back in the next work session with more specific responses.
Okay, great. I think that works. I think there's consensus there. So you'll take a look. We'll try to thread the needle, find a compromise here, and address this in a way that is context-driven, which really should be how we're viewing it. But I appreciate council staff for the recommendation and planning for your willingness to take another look. Ms. Dunn?
Great, thank you. We are on page 12 of the staff report. We're moving on to the Old Columbia Pike and Musgrove Road Activity Center. The plan states that this activity center is consistent with the medium centers as shown in Thrive. And it provides a number of recommendations for the activity center as a whole. Those are listed on the bottom of page 12 and most of page 13 of the staff report. I don't have any recommendations other than to accept these, although I believe that Mr. Kenny is going to make a comment.
Yeah, so, here's where I'll bring in the conversation on the increased bike and pedestrian connections. This is the main one that I believe this is the main one that MCDOT has called out as a good opportunity to have that increased connection, as there's going to be a pretty substantial activity center here. The idea would be to connect zones on the map of this activity center on page 14 would be to connect zone 8B and zone 9. Have a recommendation for presumably a bike and pedestrian bridge, although I haven't heard specifics.
Okay, let's hear from Department of Transportation.
Yeah, Andrew Bossi, Montgomery County DOT, pretty much hits it. I would not necessarily specify a bridge, but just some form of pedestrian bicycle connection. I'd say at least one, possibly more, however you want to phrase that, linking together each kind of lobe of this activity center. And also the Paint Branch High School was the earlier activity center, had a similar request, just to have that kind of open the door for future connectivity.
Okay, is there a specific recommendation for language that we think we need here?
No, not yet. And in fact, the Paint Branch one is, I believe, in the Main Street district, which we're looking to consider next work session. So what? The east side is in what I think there's room to consider this during the next work session once we have time to get
Okay,
some
so
language together.
the recommendation, or at least the thought process here that you're suggesting, is for us to look at it in the context of all of the connections to Paint Branch High School and to the other centers. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
These two in particular. Happy to work with DOT
All right,
staff.
so
and planning staff.
you'll work on this offline and come back to us in the next session. And
That's
we'll
right.
take it up as, part of both together, essentially, because it'll be similar.
Yes, Clark Larson with Functional
Larson.
Planning. We're happy to do that. I just wanted to stipulate that any of those improvements would likely be contingent upon these properties redeveloping. It's similar to the park space that we're calling for and other improvements. So I don't think that would necessarily take place today because there's a Verizon office and Fairland Data Center there occupying it. But I think the language would get to under redevelopment, a better bike and pedestrian facility should be constructed. So just wanted to point that out.
Okay, appreciate that. On the park recommendation, if we're ready for that piece of it, since you just mentioned it, parks are hard to make happen when they're not public lands. I am experiencing this in my own district, even when there's huge consensus. They're very expensive, and they take a long time to move forward as part of broader redevelopment. I just want to set realistic expectations here. This is a large, park recommendation. It's very important. These are desperately desired and demanded by communities. So just speak a little bit to the path forward on this, the expectation of how and when it would happen, just in the context of what you just said, and what we just heard about requiring redevelopment and not having a process for redevelopment moving forward, at least at the current time.
Yeah, so this is recommendation 5C in this activity center, and so it's really speaking to, actually it's in another one too, 3B, for both sides of US 29. So as the language really points out, this is part of redevelopment of the property. Should redevelopment happen, and we're not requiring redevelopment, but we would seek to establish a minimum 3-acre public open space. It could be dedicated as a public park. We're sort of leaving it up to negotiations with Montgomery Parks Department as to whether it be a public park or just a public use space. These are both very large properties, and should one or the other redevelop, we believe entirely, not just breaking off a piece, but when the entire property is considered for redevelopment at some point in the future. We know of no such plans, but this is the eventuality of master planning. You think about the future. We would want that contiguous, holistic park space to be established. That would probably be required as part of a dedication, a 10% open space anyway. That's the minimum zoning requirement, and I think we're getting to 3 acres with that zoning requirement anyway. This just really reflects it in the master plan to add a little bit more criteria, a little more design to it.
Okay, I just think it's important to note a 3-acre contiguous open space is a large open space, and these things tend to be difficult to achieve, and sometimes make redevelopment more complicated. And so I just think we need to acknowledge that at the outset.
There would potentially be a lot more people living, working, visiting here as well. So really, it goes hand in hand with a major redevelopment, bringing a lot more people. We want that open space to serve them.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I have been as enthusiastic about large public open spaces as anybody. I just think it's important that we talk about how challenging they can be to actually bring to fruition in a short period of time. Okay, I think we're good on that. You're going to come back to us on the other recommendation and combine essentially the the two parts of this, so it'll be a similar recommendation, it sounds like. Okay, great. Let's continue.
Great, thank you. So we're at the bottom of page 13, just noting that there's consensus on these recommendations with the pieces that we've mentioned will be added. The proposed zoning map for the Old Columbia Pike and Musgrove Road Activity Center is at the top of page 14, and it has map numbers 8B through 11A underneath of it with the zoning table from the master plan. Again, Colesville, Greater Colesville Citizens Association wrote in on this activity center designation, suggesting it might qualify as neighborhood or that it could be combined with the activity center at Old Columbia Pike and East Randolph, although staff again agrees with the planning board in thinking about the future for this area and that it is quite a large area, that it could definitely have the vision for a medium activity center in the future. Some of those medium centers that I couldn't recall earlier are Olney, Rock Springs, Burtonsville, and Twin Brook. And the zoning are typically CRT or CR, with densities ranging from 1.25 to 2.5 FARs. If you turn to page 15, you'll see what's proposed. While it is a big area, again, as we just noted, two of the very prominent properties in this have quite a bit of acreage, so there's only 4 different map numbers. And the first two are going from the employment office zone, recommendation for a 2 FAR for a CR zone. These are large properties, and so that provides quite a bit of development potential and likely to incentivize redevelopment. And knowing also that the trigger for optional method under CR is only 0.5, and so this also is a signal to the community that we're hoping to get some real public benefit conversations about these properties as they move forward and redevelop. The other 2 properties are CRN zoned, again, standard method, and we can include those in just the collaboration that will happen with planning staff and council staff to think about where it might be appropriate to make some slight increases.
Okay.
Is that good with everyone? Okay. The last activity center we'll cover today is Old Columbia Pike and East Randolph Road. Again, the plan says that this is consistent, the vision for this as a medium center. It has general recommendations, which are listed on page 16 of the staff report. Again, a lot of times in these general recommendations is where we're bringing in more of the transportation-related recommendations for these very specific centers, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kenny.
Again, my comment here just citing for the record and for reference's sake what it means to be a downtown context area within the Complete Streets Design Guide. Essentially, it's a town center area that is anticipating more traffic. So this activity center being just that little bit more busy anticipated than the Briggs Cheney activity center, but agreed with the planning recommendations.
So focus on pedestrian safety, downtown walkability, but just a higher capacity area.
Right.
Okay, the third recommendation, I put a council staff note under. It is related to the property at 2131 East Randolph. The council did receive quite a bit of testimony on this property. We will be discussing it particularly at the end of the discussion on this activity center because you received testimony on this particular property. I think it was one of the few places that, rather than more general testimony you received about whether something should or shouldn't be an activity center, it was really focused on one particular piece of property. So rather than cover this general recommendation here, we'll cover it later. That said, with the rest of the general recommendations for this activity center, council staff suggests the committee support these recommendations. Okay, without objection?
Okay.
All right, so now we're at the bottom of page 17, and you can look at the map there. It's been reproduced so that you can see the outline of this activity center and the properties it incorporates. It's quite large in that respect, and there are quite a few properties. The zoning map from the master plan is at the top of page 18. Again, testimony from the Greater Colesville Citizens Association. Council staff is in agreement with planning board that a medium center is a good designation for the vision for this area. The table at the bottom of 18 is similar to the ones you've seen before, where it shows the size of the zoning blocks, potential for FARs under the zoning. And so the similar comment, right, where it's CRN or CRT or has a very, it doesn't trigger optional method, review those with planning staff. Otherwise, it seems to be an appropriate approach to this center. I'll see if any comment.
Nope. Let's continue.
Okay, so if we'll review those properties, but now this brings us to page 19 of the staff report, and in that we did receive, the council received correspondence related to 2131 East Randolph. It's a vacant property about 10 acres in size. I do want to note I did have one error in the staff report here on page 19. The property in question is owned by the Potomac Conference Corporation of the Seventh-day Adventists. And as I do note, this is correct, the council did receive oral testimony at the public hearing, both in support and in opposition to the proposed zoning change. What I have next is that the written correspondence received from the Potomac Conference and Nova Ventures were in support. I had also listed the General Conference. It did write in, it did support the master plan zoning, but it was for its own property. It didn't mention the property at 2131, so I want to be on the record to just clarify that. But the supportive testimony did come from the Potomac Conference and Nova Ventures, although you did receive correspondence also in opposition. That came from the Southern Asian Seventh-day Adventist Church and a petition from 30 community members, although I will note that the petition was submitted over a year ago, and it was in relationship to a local map amendment. And the primary concerns that we heard in the testimony we received related to opposition to the potential for the construction of a large grocery store and the impact of possible pedestrian connections onto neighboring properties. So in evaluating, this is again a more difficult one. You look at one particular property, but you look at the zoning map or the map for this activity center, and you see that if you look at 17, property 13 is the property in question, and it anchors one of the four main corners of the intersection of this activity center. It's not, down the block. It's not inconspicuous. It's a pretty big anchor to a major activity center. And so council staff turned to what was planning staff vision for the area, which is noted at the bottom of page 19, that it was to allow for small-scale mixed-use development and really to bring about some redevelopment that can support the East Randolph BRT in that area. So in considering whether this property should be reconfirmed for only residential development, it seems like that would not really fulfill the vision for an activity center, especially as one of the primary pieces of property in the quadrant of that activity center, especially along BRT and the intersection of BRT in this area. I will note that the proposed zoning for the property, it's 1 FAR for CRT, would not trigger optional method, but the commercial, which had been the discussion of some concern, is 0.25 FAR. It is the smallest amount of commercial density that this zone can award to a property. It would require probably review under the subdivision regs, because to do anything on a vacant property will need subdivision, and so you will get the board to look at this and in conformance with a master plan just related to that preliminary plan, if nothing else. And so council staff on page 20 suggested that you could actually have some additional language just added to that recommendation we skipped over earlier that is general for this activity center, and it's related to how this development of this property interacts with the community. And as it's currently written, it would say future development of the unimproved property at 2131 East Randolph should, and council staff added, strive to provide a pedestrian connection to the Manors of Paint Branch HOA, and if accepted by the HOA, a connection to the private Staley Manor Drive to provide for non-vehicular access from the HOA and Rolling Acres neighborhood. Strive to, and if accepted, both of those texts kind of imply that this will be something to work with the community, and they are not a foregone conclusion. If you didn't have strive to in there and just said that the connection should be provided, maybe that's causing some of the concern. And then added a sentence, future development should also seek to provide compatible transitions to the neighboring properties. Language like this isn't inconsequential if it's in the master plan and the preliminary plan. Finding by the board to approve a plan has to be to have substantial conformance with the master plan. They will look at any type of recommendation related to properties like this, and what the community and what the planners expect to happen in this location. And then furthermore, and then I'll open, obviously, the committee and the planning staff may have questions. council staff suggests that the committee might want to consider upping that total density to 1.25, only for the fact that if in fact this does move forward, it's a prominent part of that intersection, and we do get some redevelopment there, it would be nice to get public amenities for the public. And the only way to get that would be is if you have a slightly higher total density. You don't have to change the C or the R. So that's it.
I'll turn to Councilmember Fani Gonzalez, then I'll turn it to Councilmember Ming.
I just want to say I appreciate you, Pam, for all your comments and your interest of making sure that we're hitting those public benefits. And I agree with everything that you just said, 100%. And just going to leave it there, short and sweet.
Councilmember Ming.
Thank you. So I am really appreciative of all the recommendations that you have put forth here. There are many areas of the master plan where we are seeing the movement of residential zones to be rezoned for mixed use, and that is an acknowledgement of something that we have heard up and down East County, that they are looking for amenities, that they are looking for public benefits and that type of development. And so I appreciate the responsiveness of this plan to those asks and those overdue needs. And so I'm supportive of nearly all of those transitions there. At this one particular property where we have at 2131 East Randolph, where we have heard from many of the residents there. As I take a look at the map, they are, and again, many of these residents are also excited about new amenities coming to their district, coming to East County. And that said, they are, many of them within walking distance of the White Oak Town Center already. We're looking at map section 14A, right across the street there, which is has the proposed CR zoning. I am very supportive of the second look that we're going to take at where we can even increase upzone further to open up the possibility of those optional amendments. So in this one particular place, I think that it would be appropriate to look for a compromise position that would help us meet our housing targets for market rate and affordable housing units. It would also be responsive to what we've been hearing from the community while still maintaining our goals for walkable communities and an increase of public benefits and amenities. So I would ask the committee to consider a compromise position there in regards to this one piece. Thanks.
Okay. Councilmember Fani Gonzalez supports the recommendation, it sounds like, from planning. We have the district council member who's looking for a compromise. If Councilmember Joanna wants to weigh in, I hear what you're saying here. I would like to find a way forward here as well, and am somewhat deferential to the district council member. Yeah, sure. Let me yield back.
Apologies. And yeah, so when I knew a compromise position, we've heard from some residents there who would like for nothing to be built there, nothing to change, which I do not think is appropriate or responsive to the needs or the wants of the district at large. We've heard from folks who want to maintain R200, and we've heard from many residents who think maybe R90. So that is kind of the ask that I'm hearing there. I don't know that that's a fit when we look at the district at large, when we look at the full scope of the plan. But I would look again for the committee to think about a compromise position in between the two. Thanks.
Well, appreciate that. If we're going to go just housing, I would say R90 is not dense enough and does not meet the needs. It would have to be something more significant than that. Townhouses at minimum, I would say. Personally, just in terms of density, from my perspective, I think it does matter to be the district council member here, and I do think there should be some deference to that. So I would be comfortable in being supportive in pursuing something more like a compromise, but agree that R90 is not sufficient. let me turn it to Councilmember Jawando to get his take, and then I'd like to turn it over to planning to get your views on what the impact would be on making adjustments to this site.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the perspectives of council staff and of my colleagues on the committee and district council member. I also agree that there should be some deference, and we heard, at the public hearing for the master plan and through a lot of correspondence and just in the neighborhood, because as many of you know, I frequent this area quite a bit and live around there. And I would also be interested in a compromise. We have to develop on that site. We need the possibility of not only more housing, but more, densely populated housing in that area. We do have amenities coming, and we want more to come with the town center and other things that are underway, and we want to encourage that. So I'll be curious to hear from planning as well about what might be possible, but also understand the sensitivity of some of the folks in the area. But I do agree that R90 would be too big. It would need to be more densely considered than that. So I think I'm in a similar place as you, Mr. Chair, and the district council member, and look forward to hearing from planning.
All right, let's turn to planning and get a sense from you. You could speak to the recommendation itself and its compatibility with the broader master plan and why you approached it. Sell your approach here, and then if you could respond to if there were a different direction where it was focused on denser housing, what that would look like and what any concerns you would have or ways that you would approach that.
Why don't we kind of address those two questions sort of in backwards order?
Sure.
I would say I would ask the committee to let us look at this in more detail, taking into consideration Councilmember Meek's requests, and we can come back and work with council staff. We can come back to hopefully the next work session with some recommendations, and I think there's some different options that have already been noted. I think what we could do is sort of identify what those are, sort of the pros and cons of each of those, and then provide a recommendation to the committee in terms of responding to that request. And then secondly, I'd like Clark to talk about the recommendation that was made in the draft plan and that the planning board supported for this site.
All right, let's start with that, and then I'll turn to colleagues of their interest level of having you come back. But let's start with an explanation of the recommendation itself.
Yeah, thank you. Again, Clark Larson with Montgomery Planning. I think the approach on this property and others at the intersection and in this activity center was to try to craft a zoning balance for what might happen consistent with the more smaller center down here. So we're trying to establish future development possibilities that would be focused on the intersection and then tapering down to adjacent properties and homes and churches and whatnot. And so that's really why we're looking for this balance, notably with a lower commercial density, floor area ratio, but really allowing more residential to be here. So that's really why it's focused on the higher floor area ratio for residential uses. In a moment, I want to speak to more of the language about this path as well. So I think that's a separate issue. But really, the zoning approach, I think, would be consistent with other areas in the activity center. And so we think it's appropriate as it is now. I think you could increase FAR somewhat and still maybe get a similar product, similar development and impact on the neighborhood. But that's really the approach we took.
Okay, so the request from the request from the district council member and the request from planning in response is to look into what a more dense housing compromise might be. It's R200 currently. The community has asked for R90. You've heard, I think, clearly from even those who are willing to move forward with a more housing-focused approach that it be a more dense option than R90. so townhome or otherwise, and there's different options there. So you would have an opportunity to look at that and what that might entail. Go ahead.
Yeah. I could add that we did have somewhat of a test case for what some might think is appropriate here in the local map amendment that was requested for this property. That was certainly, we were aware of that when crafting the recommendation, but that was a type of density and mixes of housing types, whether it's townhomes, small-scale multi-unit development. It's almost seems like it proved that that's possible. I don't know if it could have gone higher density than that. That remains to be seen in how we can look at it, but that's sort of one guidepost that we were looking at for what was feasible on this property and others around it.
Could you talk a little bit about the likelihood that all of the activity centers redevelop? So, one of the arguments that we hear from community members, and I heard Councilmember Ming, speaking to this, is in isolation, wanting to see, amenities in certain places. But the question is, on the one hand, you want zoning to allow flexibility so that, we're not necessarily picking exactly which side of the street a project is going to move, or picking one property owner where we think it's going to happen versus another property owner. We want generally to have certain land use and certain amenities and, general areas, and to a certain extent, we need the private sector to move forward. These are privately owned, privately held properties, and we want that to occur. And I think there's sometimes misconception that zoning dictates outcomes, which it doesn't. It dictates opportunities that may or may not yield benefits, may or may not come to fruition. Can you just speak a little bit to how you view in the aggregate the likelihood and the possibility that all the activity centers as recommended in this area occur, and how they would interplay with one another, and whether or not there's enough housing to serve it? Because one of the things that we've seen in other areas of the county is a move to retail in certain areas, Rockville Town Square being a good example, where there actually isn't housing to justify it. Even in Friendship Heights, one of the complaints and one of the concerns that we are now getting is that there's actually not enough housing to support the retail. And making sure that we get that balance right. We don't want just housing and no amenities, but you don't want just amenities with not enough housing, because it basically doesn't allow the survival of the retail or other commercial uses. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
So as a non-expert about the housing market, I would say that there's always going to be housing demand. It's just a matter of when and where. So I think you're always going to be able to find someone willing to build various housing products in various places, whether they're transit served or highway served, or if they're in a town center or suburban area or not. So we are, one of the overarching goals in this plan is to provide more opportunities for housing units, whether it's the range of densities. The next, I would say, it's just a matter of when. I don't necessarily think that all activity centers will build out to the maximum extent possible under the zoning regime that is being recommended. It really sets up, as you say, the foundation, the opportunities for certain properties to come in and know that, oh, I can get this. This is, the potential growth that I can provide in this property. We know some locations that are ready to go in this plan area. I think this one property being a good case in point. And there's some other locations that certainly have some commercial demand and would likely have residential development once this plan is adopted in whatever form the council approves it. So I think to some extent you're going to see some movement after the plan is adopted, but some areas and some properties will not be addressed, not be developed, redeveloped, or invested in the near term. It may take some time for the, maybe the White Oak Science Gateway Master Plan to build out more and create more activity, maybe the bus rapid transit line to become more frequent, a better service, something that's seen as, really gets me to Silver Spring quickly. versus maybe getting stuck in traffic today. So that might need to jump over the threshold. So that would be my initial reaction.
Just wanted to add a few points maybe to supplement what Clark just noted, but kind of to take a bigger step back. The first is one of the things that we're trying to accomplish with the Fairland and Briggs Cheney Master Plan is to reverse the disinvestment, a policy of disinvestment in the East County. And so part of what we are doing here is to come up with zoning recommendations that could support future redevelopment. You know, as Clark noted, market conditions can vary even within one plan area. There's certain areas that we think will probably move forward first or sooner than others. But the key thing is that if we have a master plan that closes the possibility of even having that type of redevelopment, we will just be perpetuating the previous decisions that we have done in the county in terms of an outcome that will result in disinvestment. So that's sort of a big picture piece of it. The other piece with regards to recommending zoning in one of the CR zones in different areas is because we are also trying to make sure that the Fairland Briggs Cheney community has the opportunity for complete communities, which is, as we all know, is one of the big sort of concepts out of Thrive Montgomery 2050. And so these are all, you know, they're all sort of showing up in different ways, which is what we say in Thrive. A complete community is not going to look the same in every community. But I think that kind of gets to why where there are opportunities to move from, you know, an R200 or a residential only zone to CR zoning. That's part of what we're trying to accomplish as well. And so I just, you know, want to kind of pull out those sort of big policy moves that we're trying to do, which again is really trying to address these earlier decisions, but also to try to help implement what Thrive is really setting out. And we think that there are opportunities in the Fairland and Briggs Cheney area to have both more opportunities for complete communities, more opportunities for activity centers to be able to redevelop in the future.
Appreciate that. So it sounds like we have a preliminary interest in looking at denser housing at this site. I don't know that we're going to vote today on exactly what that is. I think we're going to ask that planning come back here with that. At the next work session, we can formally vote on it, but it seems clearly the direction that we're moving towards. It would be a 2-to-1 vote, but we can formally vote on that later. I want to get back to the pedestrian path because I think that is, you know, part of this too, but I think we can take that up when we finalize you know, what we're doing on this particular site. But I'd like to hear Mr. Larson from you in a minute on that. I'd also like when you come back to us to look at what is the housing that would be possible on the current site as it is zoned today. What is the housing that would be possible on the planning board recommended zoning? And then what would be in your recommendation of a townhouse, you know, a denser townhouse style, but I'll leave some flexibility for you all to look at that. And there's obviously different levels of townhomes in terms of, you know, density and, you know, high, medium, and low, you know, to come back to us with, you know, what that would look like and compare the three. I think that would be helpful for our consideration before making a final decision. Does that work?
Yes.
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Does that work for the district council member who has weighed in, doesn't have a vote formally, but has weighed in strongly?
I think we can reasonably touch on the path for a moment.
Yes, that'd be great.
Have that conversation.
Yeah, I'd like it to at least set it up, at least cue it up. And
Sure.
Again, we don't have to make a formal decision here until we've formally decided on this site, but I think it's helpful to at least understand the basis of the recommendation and what the decision points are.
Mm-hmm. So the way that the recommendation was written, the intent was to treat a potential trail connection, if there was redevelopment, in two parts. One was recommending that a pedestrian access point be built from the property to the edge of the property, and I don't know that it specifically says that, but it could be more clear about on the property that's being redeveloped, we would like a pedestrian connection to be built, trail, path, whatever it is. The second part of that recommendation is deferring to the homeowners association property that's to the south, not dictating that the path should be built on their private property, but that the developers of the property at 2131 East Randolph Road work with the HOA to try to complete that connection to the road. The Stanley Manor Drive is a private road in the homeowners association. So this recommendation is really about, trails and paths can be accomplished in any development project in this plan area or countywide. We just know that there's a particular interest in connecting the potential grocery store, the future housing to the rest of the community in Rolling Acres, rather than having it be an unimproved connection. You probably would get some desire line paths if it wasn't accessible and built to a standard. So that's really what this recommendation is about. So we took it in two parts. With the addition of strive to, we feel that that sort of softens the recommendation in the master plan. It still says should, it doesn't say require in the master plan. So it may or may not be built even with just saying should. We think it should be fairly strong, and so we think if you add strive to, it means that parties could go attempt to work with the adjacent property owner, they could attempt to build it on their own property, that they sort of have more of an out, and we think it's more of an important connection. So we would be resistant to adding strive to, but I think the next part of that addition that council staff recommends about future redevelopment, compatible transitions, that's perfectly fine. That would be supportable by us. Yeah.
Okay, and just from a practical standpoint, what would happen if the master plan recommendation stays as it is without strive to?
It would become a
then
master
the connection, the property that it's connecting to says, we don't want a connection. We're not going to, we're going to put up a fence on our property, which we have the right to do, or we are going to, block that connection because we don't want a connection. What would that requirement look like? The planning board, based on master plan compliance, would require them to pay for a path to nowhere? I'm just trying to understand from a practical standpoint, because we do have some of these odd dynamics where we have a master plan that says something must happen, and then a practical reality that says we don't want it on, to connect, on our side, our piece of this we don't want, and now all of a sudden you're asking for an extraction basically to accomplish nothing. So, I mean, to me, that's my concern.
Yeah, for the record, Patrick Butler.
We can get you a chair. Hold on, Mr. Butler.
Yeah.
Wait a second here.
Whatever it takes. Yeah, for the record,
We
Patrick
don't want to have any
Butler.
squatters in the council office building. So.
Right. Honestly, I think the qualifier should was enough. It's not, again, that's suggestive. It's not a mandate, and so we would have to work that out through the process with the applicant and the adjoining property owners. There have been instances where adjoining property owners are against connections like this, where we feel that they're really important. Connectivity to various centers, neighborhoods, et cetera, are obviously very important to us. And so we have had paths that lead to either fences or other obstacles to allow for that connectivity in the future should desires change. I'll also note that within this community, perhaps you remember on the tour, there are some unfortunate past land use decisions that intentionally put up fences to block pedestrian movements that at the time, again, were in response to neighborhood opposition that over a period of time are now seen as desirable. I think even the community residents themselves would like better connectivity. It's really hard to move through this area. So with that,
to be clear, I want pedestrian connections. I think that that's helpful. I'd like properties to be connected to one another. I mean, I live in an area, even in urban downtown Bethesda, where there are not pedestrian connections naturally to get from one part to another, even in a semi-walkable urban place, and it creates major obstacles to actually accessing different parts of the community for a large number of people. So I agree with you in principle. I just want to avoid the issue where the second part of something doesn't happen and we're requiring somebody to build infrastructure that doesn't actually accomplish a goal, and, which I think everybody loses in that case. So, I just want to make sure that if I think that's where the strive to recommendation was coming from. I see a nod from council staff.
It was that, and it was also listening to what were the objections for the people that said they weren't interested in having the zoning recommendation move forward the way it was connections to the neighborhood and a potentially large grocery store. So I felt that if we could have language where that connection was something that was going to require a conversation and some type of collaboration, that they may be more comfortable with having the development proceed that might occur on that corner to make it the type of place that is community building.
Okay, Councilmember Fana Gonzalez.
It's hard for me not to put my hat as a former planning board member when I have seen site plans coming in and I see this language coming in. I'm the type of person who will have fought for this and fight with everything you can imagine to ensure that we have that connection, because it doesn't say that you cannot have it. It pushes that conversation, but at the end of the day, it's also up to the planning board members to be focused and make sure that this is reality. Here, I don't see anything that will not allow me to fight for that connection. It just makes it more, I don't know, I guess diplomatic. To me, the comments that we had during the public hearing, I'm okay with it. I don't love it. I actually would have said shall provide to a pedestrian, like you must do it. That's me. But I know that's extreme for a lot of people, so I'm okay leaving it. Even if we don't have strive to and we just put should provide, I'm fine with it. I'm not gonna lose sleep over this, because once it gets to the planning board, I know our planning department will make sure that this is actually reality. We need to build connected communities, not putting walls out of fear. So I'll leave it at that.
I'm in a collaborative mood, so I'm gonna. I went with a district council member and her point. I'm going to go with my colleague on the committee on this one. So we'll strike strive to from the council staff recommendation, but at the based on the comments from planning, we'll keep the added line. Future development should also seek to provide compatible transition to the neighboring properties, so that we facilitate that conversation. Because ultimately, the goal is, if we're going to create a path, we want it to lead to something. We want it to connect to something. And so I think that engagement would be helpful. So we'll have that recommendation. And Ms. Dunn?
Yes, if we are wrapping up, I just wanted to make a few comments about what we can expect next time, if that's okay.
Great. So you're going to come back to us on a number of for this item, we're going to do a summary. And the last part of the packet, I think, is moved to a certain extent, the 1.25 FAR, because that's the broader question, and based on this conversation would be moved. So, okay, why don't you go ahead and summarize what you think what we're gonna take up at the next session that's new, and then what is coming back to us as follow-up.
Well, what I was going to ask is if we could do the follow-up on the 6th, because a staff report for the next committee work session is due in 2 days. Actually Wednesday midday. So it's very hard we actually had quite a number of things coming back today, and some rethinking on the zoning is one of them, and I think that's a thoughtful exercise that might take us more than a day to do. So what I would hope, we actually have 2 more districts to cover. We have plan implementation, and we have the fiscal impact study that has been submitted. So I would say that at the work session on Monday, we will cover the Main Street district, the neighboring, the neighborhoods district, and we will cover implementation and the fiscal impact statement. And on the 6th, come back to all the follow-up items. If the committee is okay with that.
Yes, that sounds good. So we'll come back next week with what we're planning to come back to, the items that haven't been covered, the outstanding items that require follow-up to give sufficient time for there to be back and forth between planning and council staff, and where appropriate on the transportation side of things, Department of Transportation will provide the extra week to allow those conversations to take place. And so we will have 2 more meetings on this plan. I think we'll be able to wrap it up on the 6th, just to be very clear to everybody, and we should have a recommendation to the full council, but there are a few outstanding items that we'll need to address. We'll also look to the 1.25 FAR recommendation and the individual properties where planning staff finds that to be reasonable and appropriate. So we'll take that up on the 6th as well, along with the transportation and this particular site. Okay, all right. With that, thank you everybody for your participation, and we are adjourned.